un presidente del Parlamento Europeo, Gil Robles, que nos dejó hace unos días. Un gran europeísta, presidente de los federalistas europeos, con quien he compartido muchos caminos en la construcción europea. Señoras y señores diputados, intervengo en este debate en nombre y representación del Consejo de la Unión, cuyas formaciones
of the European Union in its general foreign affairs and defense formation. I am at the helm, so I am speaking from the point of view of governments, the intergovernmental perspective, and that's one of the pillars that underpins the EU. And after that, the President of the European Commission will be giving the community point of view. So I'm going to try to make sure that I don't say the same thing twice, but as High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy, we are interested in the measures taken by member states, and then, of course, the Commission's foreign policy. So we have a dual function. We've got external policy and security and defense, which aren't the same, even though one follows on from the other very often. And the war in Ukraine has highlighted the importance of the common defense and security policy. So it's been a wake-up call for Europe, a geopolitical wake-up call. And as Chancellor Scholz said a few days after the invasion, this has been, and I'm going to mangle this probably in German, this has been a Scheitenwind. So this hasn't just been for Germany, but it's been for the whole of Europe, a wake-up call before a new reality for us, which was war. And it is something that wasn't on our intellectual horizon because we had dropped our guard. And what proves that is the fact that our defense stockpiles were very low and our defense capabilities were low as well, and our capacity to react wasn't what it should have been. So this has really sounded the alarm bells because it which is up to you to judge and debate today. I hope that this debate will be used for this, in order to highlight what we've done. You're aware of what we've done. I'm not going to reiterate this. So the representatives of the peoples of Europe have to judge it. What else could we have done? What have we achieved? We have supported Ukraine militarily, economically, financially, diplomatically, as much as we have been able to. We have done a lot, but in my opinion, it hasn't been enough. I visited Ukraine recently with the President of the Commission and commissioners attending the Ukraine-EU summit. And once again, I've seen people that are defending their freedom and independence, and leaders that are trying to deal with this dramatic situation by taking the European path. President Zelensky said it here only a few days ago. The situation in Ukraine at the moment is dramatic, but the Ukrainians are looking towards Europe, like so many other people so in the past, seeing it as a promising future. It may be that the road is long because the war is long, but we have to do everything we can to make sure that this promise becomes a reality. We want Ukraine to win the war, and then I mean, it belongs to the European family anyway, but we hope that we'll find in Europe the future that it needs. Now, the reality on the ground is extremely worrying at the moment. More than 360,000 Russian soldiers are there, twice as many as before the war, and the Russian counter-offensive has begun, even if on a small scale. And for the first time, Ukraine doesn't have the advantage, the edge, by having more troops on the ground. So Ukraine has appealed to the EU member states and all those who help Ukraine. And yesterday we met in the Ramstein group with all those countries that coordinate military aid to Ukraine in order to take stock of the situation, to see what we've done, what we've given them as aid, and to also see what they need, more ammunition and more training for Ukrainian troops, in order to continue showing that we will not tire in our efforts to help Ukraine. Now, I will say that I like war as little as you do. I'm not a warmongering individual. I really do not like war. Of course, I prefer peace. As almost everyone, there's no point in reiterating this. But what we have to discuss is how to achieve peace. And to achieve peace, we have to continue supporting Ukraine militarily more than we have done so. And this is going to be one of my key messages. Now, to achieve peace, you need to win the war, and you can help Ukraine militarily, and at the same time, in parallel, make all the diplomatic efforts necessary to ensure that peace comes as quickly as possible. These aren't alternatives. They're not contradictory. We have to do both things in parallel. We have to provide more support and step up our diplomatic efforts. And very soon I'll be able to plead this before the UN and ask the Secretary General to start, if he wants a mediation process. Everyone has failed up to now. Whoever has spoken to Putin has come back with the message that he wants to continue this war until he achieves his military goals. It would be ingenuous to ask for us to stop providing military assistance so that the war can last less time and that peace will come about. And I'm using the word ingenuous, not to use a stronger word now, because if we do that, the peace that we will achieve will be a Russian victory, and that will constitute a huge threat to our security. So what have we done? What has the Council done? I represent the Council here today. First of all, it has adopted an impressive package of sanctions, in fact 9, and the 10th is on the way. I'm sure that the President of the European Commission will refer to it. Now, the aim is to weaken the Russian economy, and we have achieved this. Many say that sanctions are inefficient and that they haven't dealt a blow to the Russian economy, and that, on the contrary, that they have caused problems here in Europe. It's true that the Russian economy hasn't collapsed and that GDP growth isn't what had been forecast. And it's true that last year it got extraordinarily high revenues that came from oil and gas. But the situation is turning. Thanks to our sanctions and thanks to the oil price cap. If you look at the 3 key parameters of an economy, it's oil and gas revenue, and the Russian finance minister said a few days ago that in January they are 46% lower than last year. So, yes, they raked in a lot in 2022 because prices hiked, they soared. And we still depended on them, but we no longer depend on them. One of our great successes has been to reduce our extraordinary dependence, energy dependence on Russia to almost zero. No, so 46% less January to January. And if you look at the public deficit, it's 40 times higher in January 2023 compared to January 2022, 14 times higher. So from 2 billion to 1.8 trillion. And if you look at the trade balance, you'll see that, yes, they had a huge surplus in 2022 because of a bumper wheat crop. But in January 2023, it's at a record low, at a historic low since 2007. So the sanctions are a low-action poison, a little bit like arsenic. It takes time to bring about effects, but they have had an impact. 45% of Russia's technological dependence is on Europe. Their plane and car plants have lost 80% of their capacity. Yes, the ruble is strong artificially, but the Russian economy is going to pay a very high price for this war. They have lost their main energy client, the Europeans, and they will not get them again. And it's not going to be easy. It's going to be almost impossible to find an alternative client for Russian gas because China is too far, and oil is being sold at $40 a barrel. In other words, half the Brent crude oil price. India and China buy it at this lower price, and that is also because of the impact of our price cap, which is a huge political success because it has greatly slashed the Russian revenue, but not had a negative impact on the world market. So our measures are having an effect. It's happening slowly but surely, but they are undermining the industrial and energy bedrock of the Russian economy. Putin has already lost the energy battle in the same way as he is losing the war ethically and morally, and even militarily, even though Ukraine hasn't won yet. The second thing the Council did, apart from adopting these package of sanctions put forward by the High Representative and the President of the Commission working hand in hand. And let me thank the President of the Commission for her leadership and energy. We have also provided weapons to Ukraine. Yes, for the first time, the EU hasn't used resources from its budget, but has used resources from the member states in order to arm a country at war. And if you put the European Peace Facility amount together with what member states have done bilaterally, we're talking about a total of 12 billion euro, and the total amount of assistance is 60 billion. No one has done more than Europe to help Ukraine in financial and economic terms. And our military aid might be less than the US, but it is not a negligible amount. Yesterday at Ramstein, I said something which I would like to repeat here. Not only do we have to continue the assistance we provide, but we've got to step it up. And I'd like to put forward a plea to those countries that have modern and efficient battle tanks and that are just gathering dust in their depots and aren't being used, to give them to Ukraine and to provide them to Ukraine as quickly as possible. Because this spring and upcoming summer are going to be decisive. The war will be decided in the spring and summer, and we have spent too much time discussing whether we were going to provide the famous Leopard tanks while Russia was preparing its offensive. We've spent too much time discussing decisions that should have been taken before. We were fearful that getting involved in the war would be seen as pseudo-belligerence, but we said that we would provide battle tanks, and the Third World War hasn't broken out. Yes, the tanks aren't there, and it's going to take time for them to get there, but time is crucial, and time is measured in lives lost. So it's extremely important to focus on the European Peace Facility and to coordinate the work done by the member states and to ask for more and more aid to be provided more quickly. This is the key message I want to put across this morning. But let me reiterate the idea that this military assistance is not contradictory to seeking peace diplomatically. It doesn't fly in the face of that. One can go in parallel with the other. I don't understand those who say that to negotiate, we've got to stop providing military assistance to Ukraine. On the contrary, both have to be done together. This isn't a debate between doves and hawks. This is based on realism, knowing the reality on the ground and what we have to and must do. And this is also an alarm bell. Europe has to understand that we need a higher defense capability than we have. Our defense industry has to be stronger. The ability of our armies to deal with this kind of situation has to be greater, because we've seen that it's fallen short of what was necessary. This war is going to be long. And we've got to tackle this based on the conviction that a war of attrition is a logistical battle. It's a battle of logistics. It's a battle of information. Because if you look at those who are in Sahel, we're talking about the same groups in Ukraine, the Wagner group. They're both in the Sahel and in Ukraine. So there's the issue of the minerals and geopolitics, and we need to face the situation geopolitically. This is also the job that you have to do, ladies and gentlemen, honourable members. We've got to convince Europeans that we cannot flag, that war comes at a cost, but freedom we have to pay the price for freedom as well. And the price that we're paying is small compared to what others are paying. Putin cannot win this war. Ukraine has to win this war in order to build stable peace in Europe. Thank you.
The High Representative, I now to the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen.
Thank you very much, Madam Presidente Roberta. On HRVP, my dear Josep, honourable members, it's now almost a year ago, on the night of February 24th, that Russia invaded Ukraine and war was back to Europe. That night, I think all of you remember that our thoughts, and I think also our prayers, went to our friends in Ukraine. I remember vividly how we followed the news from the Donbass and Kyiv with unbearable tension. And we all were wondering whether the Ukrainian friends would be able to withstand the onslaught of the Russian invaders. Today we know, yes, they would. 1 year on, Putin's perfidious plans continue to be foiled by the brave Ukrainian nation. 1 year on, Russia has completely alienated itself from Europe, its most important economic relationship, and is isolated on the global stage. 1 year on, this very parliament last week welcomed the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, as the true hero he is. And 1 year on, Putin's imperial fantasies have woken up to a bleak reality, while Ukraine's dreams of freedom are stronger than ever, and they will prevail. I'm deeply convinced. Honourable members, what a difference 1 year of unity and resolve can make. In the early hours of February 24th, when Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine, a whole continent was holding its breath. Some predicted that Ukraine would fall in a matter of days. But instead, the legendary bravery of the Ukrainian people stunned the world. Their fierce resistance at the gates of Kiev, the civilians who stopped Russian tanks in the south, the counteroffensive of Ukraine's armed forces in Kharkiv and Kherson. We can never match the sacrifices and the bravery of the Ukrainian people. But what we can do is stand firmly by their side. And that's what we've done from day one on, and we will continue to do that. They can rely on us. And indeed, a whole continent has mobilized, from the volunteers of the Warsaw Station, you remember, who welcomed the Ukrainians fleeing Putin's bombs, basically to all citizens and companies who have cut their electricity demands. Together with you, honourable members, we have focused on three main goals. First, to support Ukraine's resistance against the invader unwaveringly. Second, to undermine Russia's war machine. And third, to build Ukraine's European future together. And these three strands of action have guided us over the last year and will continue to guide us in the months to come. Je commencerai par notre...
I would like to express our steadfast support to Ukrainian resistance. Since the start of the war, we've provided economic, humanitarian and military support to the tune of €67 billion. We have budgetary support for military capacity, humanitarian aid, aid to Ukrainian refugees. All this is a tangible contribution to Ukraine's war effort. Putin wanted to see the Ukrainian state collapse. We have helped Ukraine to remain operational even in its darkest hour. Europe breathed impetus into Ukrainian resistance, and we will continue to support it. We guarantee a constant flow of financial aid. The first part of the package, the 18 billion, has already been dispersed to Ukraine. We will continue to provide steadfast, predictable support every month. That is what Europe promised, and we have honoured our pledge. Europe also supports Ukrainian companies and workers who continue to work despite the war. We are using the single market to that end. We have integrated markets, twinned our towns and offered our electricity networks, ensured solidarity corridors so that Ukraine can export its goods around the world. That represents 20 billion in revenue for Ukrainian companies during this period of war. And we can do more. When we visited Kiev, we agreed on a roadmap to further improve Ukraine's access to our single market. Putin wanted to kill off Ukraine's European dream. Now, Ukraine is moving far more swiftly and resolutely towards Europe. At the same time, we are weakening Russia's ability to keep its war machinery in place. We have adopted 9 packages of sanctions. The Russian economy is shrinking. We need to keep up the pressure, and we're suggesting a 10th tranche of sanctions with trade bans and new checks on exports to Russia, exports of technology. We're talking about €11 billion. We are suggesting restrictions on some dozen electronic components used in Russian armed systems, such as drones, missiles and helicopters. There are also hundreds of drones manufactured in Iran, used by Russia in the battlefield in Ukraine. These Iranian drones kill Ukrainian civilians, and it is appalling. And so for the first time, we are also suggesting sanctions targeting Iranian economic operators, including those linked to the Revolutionary Guard. It is our duty to do that, to sanction such behaviour. Putin is assuming that our support for Ukraine will not last the course. He thinks it will be easy to blackmail Europe because at the time, at the start of the war, we were heavily dependent on Russian oil and gas, but he got that one wrong. 1 year on from the start of the war, he has lost the energy war that he himself triggered. We have adapted, turned to reliable partners, and we can see the results. Russia's revenue from sale of oil and gas, in particular gas to Europe, has dropped by 2/3. We have introduced a global oil price break or cap, and that has led to losses each day of 160 million for Russia. Gas prices in Europe are currently lower than before Russia invaded Ukraine. In Europe, we are now investing in clean energy and energy independence. We are looking at renewable energy sources and breaking records. Wind, solar energy, for example. Last year, we generated more energy and electricity through wind and solar than through gas. We showed resolute face and smart, savvy policies. And so in Europe, we resisted Russian blackmail and pressure and have ensured greater energy independence. Our economies are doing better. We have been able to correct our growth forecasts upwards. However, Kremlin has had to sell off gold reserves to plug the gaps caused by dropping fossil fuel revenue. Ladies and gentlemen, Putin's attempt to blackmail us has been a staggering failure, and that is good news. Ladies and gentlemen, honourable members, President Zelensky has often discussed this with me. He has talked about how people in Ukraine deal with and cope with the horrors of war, despite what happened in Irpin and Bucha. What provides them with hope after seeing Mariupol and other cities bombed? So what gives them hope? It is that firm belief that the future of their country, the future of their children, lies with the European Union. That is our third task. We want to offer the Ukrainians a bridge towards hope, to move from the horrors of war towards a better, brighter future in our midst.
And its progress on the path towards our union go hand in hand. You've heard it from President Zelensky in this very hemicycle. I've seen it with my college in Kiev. I know it from the colleagues at the Commission that they confirm it every single day. Ukrainians are making tangible progress despite the war, despite fighting the aggressor. They know that the accession to our union is a merits-based process. They have passed legislative reforms that others thought would take years. They are making this progress because they are striving for Europe with all their heart and soul. Ukraine is a nation defined not only by its history and heritage. It is a nation defined by its dreams, and Europe is one of these dreams. So, distinguished members, let's honor these dreams by standing up for Ukraine for as long as it takes, so that one day the representatives of the Ukrainian people will have their place in this very hemicycle. Long live Europe. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much, the President of the European Commission. And now we start with the representatives of the different political groups, starting with the President of the EPP Group, Manfred Weber.
President Metsola, President von der Leyen.
President Metsola, von der Leyen.
Almost 1 year of unimaginable suffering, 1 year of bloodshed, and 1 year of destruction for Ukraine and Ukrainian people. 7,000 innocent children, women, men have been killed. Many of them died in hospitals, schools and their homes at the hand of Putin's army. Over 8 million Ukrainians fled their country, their home, looking for a safe haven in Europe. This is a reality that Ukrainians have been waking up to every day since 24th of February last year, since 357 days. It was a historic moment for Europe when President Zelensky was with us last week in the European Parliament, and I want to thank Roberta, our President, for inviting him, for managing this. A touching moment for all of us, but also an important message. 1 year ago, when we saw him on the screens, we didn't know, can he survive? Can Ukraine confront Russia successfully? And yes, President Zelensky, his army, all soldiers, and his over 40 million compatriots stand united, and they were until now successful. They show us what it means to follow the European way of life. Our Ukrainian friends show us every day what it means to be European. They show us if people have a choice, they choose democracy over autocracy, rule of law over rule of few, and freedom over tyranny. And that is called the European way of life. President Zelensky was using this frame around 20 times in his speech last week. And allow me to remind us how much socialists and Greens have been fighting against the special portfolio inside of the European Commission last time to promote and protect the European way of life. As EPP, we fought for it, and today I have to say it is the headline. It is, you don't want to hear this, but it's the headline of President Zelensky and probably the motivation for our Ukrainian friends, the European way of life. And we should be proud about this. Roberta Metsola, as our president, was the first to risk to go to Kiev. We are on your side. That was the main message of Roberta. And Ursula von der Leyen was leading to grant the candidate status to our Ukrainian friends. And let's be clear, this was not welcomed so much by Scholz, by Macron, by Sanchez or by Costa. That's why I want to thank our two presidents for her leading role in a historic moment to keep Ukraine on our side. For us as EPP, it has been clear from the very first moment we stand beside our Ukrainian friends who seek, live and defend the European way of life. Putin wants to destroy this. He's the opposite. He hates it. His dictatorship stands for suppression, censorship, war crimes, totalitarianism. The Putin is a war criminal, and he must lose this war. This war has shaken Europe at its core, but Europe has been united and stronger than ever before. We imposed unprecedented sanctions, which will weaken Putin's war machine, and we welcome very much the new proposals now. We supported Ukraine with around 50 billion, 65 billion was your figure for financial, humanitarian and military support. We sent weapons, now finally also tanks. And I would say there is one still open question on the table, and that is about building up a real European defence capability. High Representative Borrell mentioned it, but there is not so much on initiatives currently on the table to do so. And finally, there cannot be, and let me use a historic comparison, there cannot be any kind of Munich event in the next years in front of us, where democratic politicians accepted to split up Czechoslovakia for getting peace, or at least a dream of peace. The future of Ukraine will not be decided in Berlin, in Paris, in Brussels or Washington. Only Ukrainians decide about the future of Ukraine. We will not let them alone in their fight for peace and freedom, their fight to live the European way of life. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. And now I give the floor to Pedro Marques on behalf of the S&D Group.
Thank you, Madam President, High Representative, Madam President of the Commission, dear colleagues. 1 year of the brutal Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. It resulted in the death of thousands and thousands of innocent lives, the destruction of a country, millions of refugees, increased insecurity and suffering for Europe and the world. The EU stood by Ukraine for all of this time. We will continue to support them for as long as it takes. The Ukrainians can count on our political, diplomatic, humanitarian, financial and military support. Putin, from his side, can count with our strong, resolute and increased sanctions, as it was just proposed today, which we thank, to drain his power. Now, our unity in the support of the Ukrainians has proven to be one of the biggest strengths against the Russian aggressor. That is why it is so concerning for this Parliament, I would hope for this Parliament as a whole, but unfortunately not, that some in the ranks of the EPP are now trying to put things the other way around. It was appalling to hear Mr. Berlusconi excusing Putin from his responsibilities and blaming Ukraine for this war. We have seen, yes, it was... I thank you for your applauses, Mr. Weber. It's important that you do so. But let me be clear also on this. You just said, we defend the European way of life for the Ukrainians. Good. What concrete actions will you take regarding Mr. Berlusconi, regarding his party, Mr. Weber? What concrete actions will you take? You have defended here, with all of us, sanctions regarding those that have supported Putin in this war. What kind of sanctions will start in your own political family regarding Mr. Berlusconi so that we stand united, we remain united against the Putin aggression? Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor now on behalf of the Renew Europe Group to Malik Asmani.
Dear President of the Commission, dear High Representative, dear colleagues, 1 year ago we lived in a different world. And today we see Ukrainian families torn apart because of Russia's war of aggression. Tens of thousands of people have died. And I would like to extend my condolences to their loved ones. We all remember the images from Bucha. A European Union keyring attached to a lifeless hand. Dear colleagues, Ukraine's hope are our objectives. 1 year on, we see NATO strengthen. Ukraine is firmly in the center of our European family. And we have to continue to provide massive support to Ukraine, also with more military materials, without the boost. Dear colleagues, on this sad anniversary, we need to show our determination. We need to be united in this House. Also, as a reaction to Mr. Weber on behalf of the EPP, our voice needs to be united, especially today, a year after this huge tragedy, the starting of the war in Ukraine. Dear colleagues, let us expand the EU sanction list to 6,000 Russian individuals. Let us hold Russia accountable through the Tribunal for the Crime of Aggression in The Hague. And let us use the confiscated Russia funds to start rebuilding Ukraine as soon as possible. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Mr. Asmani. And now I give the floor to the co-president of the Green Group, Terry Reintke.
Danke, Frau Präsidentin, liebe Kolleginnen.
Thank you, President, dear colleagues. A year after the brutal escalation of the war in Ukraine, it's plain that we are firmly on the side of the assailed democratic state, Ukraine. And our support, be it financial or political or be it military, is absolutely set in stone.
even if in my home country we keep hearing people trying to propagate crude and cruel narratives in order to undermine the public debate. Providing weapons to the Ukrainians will not prolong the war. That's what Putin is doing. Weapons support Ukrainians and prevent the Ukrainians being annihilated and prevent them from being occupied. As the High Representative said, delivering weapons does not preclude negotiations. Supporting a country to defend itself does not mean you are forsaking diplomacy. You are, in fact, supporting international law. I think it's important that we make this plain in the debate. We will not hark back to the status quo, not with the current Russia. The entire security situation in Europe has changed. Dear colleagues, a new world requires fresh answers, not old responses. So rather than just pillorying people, Germans and others need to look in their own backyard before pointing the finger at and pillorying other member states. A new world means we must support and continue to stand by the side of the Ukrainians if we want this new world.
I now give the floor on behalf of the ID group to Jack Madison.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, colleagues. First of all, when I heard from our representative that it was a wake-up call, what Russia did 1 year ago, I was really surprised that, are we really born yesterday? I think the war started already 9 years ago, 2014. And it isn't a surprise that Russia has ambitions to go back to the history in the Soviet Union times. And they very clearly stated that in December 2021, when they asked impossible things, that there will be no new NATO member states, that there will be like some kind of puppet countries next to the Russian border, like Ukraine, Finland, Sweden, that they are not allowed to join with the NATO. And also they asked that if you don't do like this, as we are asking, and they asked that all the NATO troops have to leave from the NATO member states, like Poland, Estonia, Latvia. In this case, we will attack you. I think it wasn't a surprise. It was clearly visible for the last 30 years. When the socialist colleagues were attacking EPP colleagues here, I should remind you that unfortunately your friend in the German government, and Mr. Scholz, is blocking more military aid. They're waiting his signature to send tanks. And now, 1 year later, they're like, oh, we have to check in which condition we have for tanks. 1 year later, and now they're checking for the condition for the tanks? Really surprising. 2014, when the war started already, it wasn't a problem for the Germans to continue with Nord Stream 2. It wasn't a problem at all. No, let's go further. It's just an economic relation. There is no economics without politics. Same thing with Americans. Ukrainians asked the fighters already in March last year, and Americans were blocking that. Poland said, we will give our old Russian fighters to Ukraine, just please send us F-16 fighters. Americans were, no, we are too afraid, no, maybe we escalate the conflict. The fact is, weakness is provocation. Our weakness is provoking Russia to go further.
Thank you.
And that's historical facts. So don't be weak, don't be too pro-Russians. Act now and fight now and win this war. Thank you.
I give the floor next on behalf of the ECR group to Beata Szydło.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, Ukraine is defending peace in Europe, and it is our duty as Europeans to stand arm in arm with them and support them, because it is also giving thanks for the Ukraine has done for us. It is our duty to support Ukraine politically, economically, in the humanitarian way, and in a military way. We need to take quick and important decisions. There is no room for political calculation. Let's remember the events that preceded the invasion. 2008, Polish President Lech Kaczyński in Georgia said clearly, when Russia attempted to attack Georgia, he said, today Georgia, tomorrow Ukraine, and later maybe Poland. Has anybody drawn any conclusions from that? No. There was still cooperation with Russia. Putin was received in Europe. There was a reset in the relationship with Russia. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk spoke with Putin like equals. Economical projects like Nord Stream 2 before Nord Stream 1 kept being implemented. There was an attempt to reset the political relationship with Russia. And then 2014, were there conclusions drawn? No. The former German Chancellor has a seat on the board of Gazprom. There was still a policy of promoting economic relationships with Russia. I'm not accusing, I'm just saying that we all need to learn our lessons from the past. We need to support Ukraine just as other member states do it, because we know that a Ukrainian victory is a victory for us all. I'd like to thank all the Europeans who have opened their hearts to Ukrainians. I have to underline the role of the Polish people, of the Polish President Andrzej Duda and of the Polish government. Ukraine must win, and we must keep supporting Ukraine, and we must keep learning lessons in order to prevent any such aggression in Europe to happen in the future again. Thank you very much.
The left group, Mick Wallace.
President, Commissioner, High Representative. Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine is unforgivable. The devastation, death and destabilisation wrought by it has led to unthinkable horrors, as in all wars. Also unforgivable is how willing Western leaders are to ensure this becomes a war without end. Instead of calls for ceasefires, dialogue and peace talks, we are deepening Western involvement in the war with no apparent concern for the repercussions. We are calling for Ukraine to take back Crimea. Experts on both sides of the ocean say that this was madness and will lead to a possible breakout of nuclear war. And it will also rally the Russian people towards the defence of Crimea if we go to that space. Zelensky has been making the rounds, begging for more weapons, but not one word to say about peace. How many of his own people must he conscript and feed into the carnage before he sits down to negotiations? And how many of the people of Europe must lose their jobs or their homes before NATO will allow these negotiations to happen? And lastly, what I'd like to know, what has happened to Germany, the jewel of Europe? Scholz told us that there'll be no peace in Russia, no peace in Europe without Russia. First you send helmets, now you're sending tanks to kill Russians. I worry for Europe.
I give the floor now to Marcel de Graaf.
Voorzitters.
President, the West is weaponizing Ukraine, has been doing so since 2014, since Jens Stoltenberg became Secretary General of NATO. As of 2014, Ukraine was shooting and killing Russian-speaking citizens in its country. We need to put an end to racist violence. This war has been triggered by the West, and the reasons are clear. Russia stands in the way of US ambition. It seeks to remain independent, retain its identity. The EU is in a bad position here. It has been hard hit by its own sanctions. The economic outlook is poor. Nord Stream has been blown up by the US. The Commission needs to consider its role in this terrible attack and talk to Norway about this, put an end to sanctions. We need to work on peace, rebuilding economy, identity and sovereignty of member states. Thank you.
Дякую, Україно. Thank you, Ukraine. Thank you for defending peace. What would Europe be like if Putin had taken over Ukraine in 3 days, as he planned? Yes, it was horrible 1 year. However, it would be much worse if the infection of Putinization took over a large part of the European continent. Today, Ukraine is winning this war, but it depends on us how fast the decisive Ukrainian victory will be achieved. A year ago, Ukrainians got not scared, fending off terrorist Russia. We are safe behind Ukraine's shoulders, and we also should not be scared. We must provide Ukraine with everything they need: air defense systems, fighter jets, tanks, long-range missiles. We must deliver on opening EU membership negotiations as soon as possible this year. We must not repeat the Bucharest NATO summit mistake. We must invite Ukraine to join NATO at Vilnius NATO summit this year. Our bravery will bring the victory faster and save many Ukrainian lives. This can also bring change in Russia itself, but we must not be afraid of the fall of Putin's regime. I didn't want to say this, what I will say now, today, but I have to. Yes, Berlusconi is horrible, but he is not alone. Socialist Schroeder, socialist presidents of Croatia, Bulgaria, socialist leader in Slovakia, let's condemn all of them. Let's fight all proxies of Putin on our own courtyards. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Ms. Juknevičiene. Next is Tonino Picula.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Commission President, Mr. High Representative. The ongoing political crisis in Moldova shows us that Russia is not limiting its assertive actions only to Ukraine. Through disinformation and foreign interference, Russia is trying to provoke a political crisis within the European Union and along European borders. With 1 year since the start of the Russian aggressions, what are the lessons we learned? A couple of them. That we need to continue supporting Ukraine as long as it takes to defend itself. That we need to make our sanctions more efficient and close all the gaps that enable their evasion. That common foreign, defence and security policies cannot remain the soft spots of our integration. That we need to be strategically autonomous when it comes to essential industries and services. That we need to continue working together on reducing our energy overdependence. That prioritising trade and economic relations without insisting on our political values leaves Europe exposed to the crisis. That we need more Europe to address all these challenges. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Mr. Picula. I give the floor now to Petras Austrevicius. Petras, go ahead.
Madam President, Council and Commission representatives, dear colleagues, Russia's imperial chauvinism has triggered war in Ukraine, fueled tensions and instability, and condemned the Ukrainian people to unprecedented suffering. For a whole year, we have been hearing lies, slander, and threats from Russia. Those intentions remain unchanged, ready to continue the war in the near future. Stopping an aggressive Russia means defeating it on the battlefield in Ukraine, providing the Ukrainians with everything and will enable them to achieve victory, to shorten the war and the suffering it has caused. Dear colleagues, no one here wants to discuss a resolution of 2 years of Russia's invasion and a war of aggression against Ukraine. So let's help Ukraine with everything that is necessary. Let us continue weakening Russia's and Belarus' war capacities, and let us punish the guilty according to their unforgivable crimes. It's a great historical moment and chance for Europe to emerge stronger, more united and less dependent from authoritarian regimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Austrevicius. Now I give the floor to Viola von Kramon-Tabaudel.
President, HRVP Borrell, President of the Commission, dear colleagues, a year ago I stood here warning Putin that the attack on Ukraine would be the end of Russia as we know it, that the imperial overstretch would doom Russian hopes of regional domination. The war that Putin aimed to last 3 days has been now waging for a year. A dying empire is desperately trying to destroy the Ukrainian state and identity, but all this is in vain. Because the brave people of Ukraine are fighting not to conquer, but to defend. Not for domination, but for survival. The unimaginable price Ukrainians are paying for freedom keeps us all free. Because Ukraine is defending us and every democracy. Because the freedom that some take for granted is never free. It is paid for by the sacrifice of brave men and women. We do not need to be convinced Ukraine is Europe, and we all continue supporting the bravery for as long as it takes and with all we have. Thank you so much.
Danke, Frau Kollegin.
Thank you, colleague. Next up, Harold Vlimsky.
Danke sehr. Meine sehr geehrten
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I listened carefully to what was said by Mr. Zelensky last week in the plenary. I've got a couple of comments. It's rather strange that there was no debate on this. The Parliament is the right forum to bandy about arguments and exchange ideas in order to find out what the best ideas are. Mr. Zelensky, according to the media, just handed out lists of who had provided what equipment and weapons. That's barking up the wrong tree. War can never be a solution. I would like to stick up for peace, as we all do. Europe is based on the principles of freedom and prosperity. If we take these ideas seriously, please play a role in the peace negotiations to prevent deaths in the Ukraine. We keep delivering weapons and more people are perishing, so please be committed to peace. Our next speaker is Anna Fotika.
President, High Rep Vice President, the alarm bell we speak about since the beginning of this debate is still on, and the war is not over. Thousands of Ukrainians perish in this war. And atrocities, Russian atrocities, because of this criminal war of aggression are unbearable. Russia has to be defeated. The alarm bell is still on for Ukraine and for all of us. We have to deliver whatever is needed to achieve this result now. Everything. Fighter jets, fighter helicopters, air defense systems with appropriate range. We do this for us and our children. We have to know this.
Danke, Frau Silvia Modig.
Thank you, Silvia Modig.
Arvoisa puhemies,
President, next week will mark 1 year since the beginning of Putin's war in Ukraine, and peace is not on the horizon. We talk a lot about providing weapons, but we don't talk enough about peace. Of course, it's not easy to achieve peace, but it should be our #1 priority Ukraine has the right to defend itself, and we have the duty to help Ukrainians defend themselves. We have to defend civilians that are the targets of Vladimir Putin and that are the potential victims of war crimes. We have to do everything in our power to make sure that Ukraine can reconquer the territories lost so that the war can come to an end. The longer the war, the more victims, and we will feel the effects over generations. And we draw on our experience in Finland. Ukraine needs aid on multiple fronts. Humanitarian aid, reconstruction aid. We're going to have to start reconstruction as soon as possible, and the reconstruction will have to be funded by Russia too.
Thank you, Martin Drzindasi.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, most of us are rightly appalled by the official position of Hungary on this conflict. The pro-Russian propaganda, the undisguised rooting for the aggressor by Prime Minister Orbán, and the recent visit of Foreign Minister Szijjártó to Minsk, while cynically talking about peace with the aggressor and its allied regime. However, don't let that mislead you vis-à-vis the Hungarian people. A majority of Hungarians know that Ukraine's fate today and our legacy of 1956 are analogous. The story of both nations fighting for their freedom against Russian aggression is the same. And just like in 1956, when official Hungary, the regime rooted for the Russians, it was the voice of the people that mattered and what the world remembers today. And finally, while Europe was numb and silent to the Hungarian cause, delaying by decades the potential reunification of our continent, today it understands the call of history and it is also brave enough to act. Thank you.
Herr Kollege
Michael Gahler.
Herr Präsident, liebe
President, honourable members, in 9 days we will mark the first anniversary of Russia's criminal act of aggression against Ukraine. We must take a moment to commemorate the innocent victims, the children, women, men, all those killed, raped and tortured, and all the Ukrainian soldiers who are fighting for a justifiable cause, defending their home nation. We in Europe need to stand with the United West and do what is needed now. First things first, we need to look at weapons, more weapons, fighter jets, artillery and tanks, battle tanks, not to conquer new territory, but to free Russian civilians from, Ukrainian civilians from Russian oppression. Those in my home country who are naive, anti-American, or secretly have some sort of false perception of the historic relationship between Germany and Russia refuse to deliver weapons. They're refusing to recognise the fascism in the Kremlin in the 21st century. Never again, Slava Ukraini.
Our next speaker is Sven Mikser.
Dear colleagues, this war will have to end with every square inch of Ukrainian sovereign territory liberated. Because otherwise, if Russia should walk out of this with territorial gains and with the current regime still intact and in power, the international rules-based order will have failed, if not entirely collapsed. I would like to underscore 2 points made by High Representative Borrell. First, implementation. It's commendable that the decision was taken to donate tanks. But now those tanks will really have to arrive, and all countries who have equipment to spare will have to step up. And secondly, it is not simply sufficient to continue supporting Ukraine militarily, but we will have to step up the support significantly so as to turn the tide of the war and make sure that Ukraine emerges victorious. And very finally, we should seek on this very issue unity in this House. Deliberately heightening political partisanship is irresponsible. It's not helpful. It's not even elegant. Thank you.
Thank you. Nathalie Loiseau next.
Monsieur le Président, Madame la Présidente.
President, Madam President, High Representative. President Zelensky came to ask for help a few days ago. 1 year after the beginning of Russian aggression, Europe needs to wake up. It is in our interest for Ukraine to win, and we have to do everything in our power to make sure it wins the war. We have to do everything we can, means that we need to do more and more quickly, more weapons deliveries, more ammunition delivered, those that will give an edge to Ukraine and help them win. We mustn't dilly-dally because there are lives at stake. We also need to work to have sanctions and make sure that no one tries to work around the sanctions. Those in Europe who help Russia do that will have to be threatened with secondary sanctions. We have heard pleas for immediate negotiations, but the Minsk agreement failure should have inoculated against the risk of frozen conflicts. Those who want appeasement, those who want to appease Russia should remember what Churchill said, that those who appease are actually feeding a crocodile, hoping they will be the last to be eaten. Thank you.
Next up, Bronis Ropė. Thank you very much, dear President, dear Commission President, ladies and gentlemen. The Russian aggression in Ukraine started as far back as 2014 and has only got worse because we failed to prevent it. We wanted cheap resources, and to do that, we forsook our principles. We talked about a strategic partnership, and that only assisted Putin in accumulating resources for his aggression. In the parliament, people keep claiming we are not ready to reduce our dependence on third countries. We are trying to find excuses for sitting on our hands. The time is ripe to show we have learned from our failures. If we want a Ukrainian victory, why are we still dilly-dallying in delivering arms? Give the Ukrainians everything they need. Let words become deeds.
Frau Kollegin Susanna
Ceccardi.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. A year ago, the red flags of the former Soviet Union were being flown by the tanks entering Ukraine. This is an attack against the territorial integrity of a state. Europe had to take sides, and we took the side of freedom, sovereignty, and the dignity of the Ukrainian people. However, 12 months later, the risk that this could become a permanent frozen conflict is a risk, and we have to ward this off for the sake of Ukrainian civilians, the first victims, and for our citizens and companies that deal with price hikes and higher bills. Could Europe have done more to achieve peace? If the solution to deal with the conflict was to send more arms, why didn't we do it quicker? The diplomatic solution and the diplomatic path is one we should take. We have to work together. The class stars doing well doesn't mean that the whole class will pass an exam. Once again, Europe is divided, and that is really the overarching aim of Putin.
Thank you. Vrecionová next. 1 minute.
Rok od ruské invaze na Ukrajinu se objevují.
1 year from the invasion, we hear about a new offensive by Russia. We hear about events in Moldova. Putin is able to do anything to reach just a small hint of victory and to be able to explain to the Russians why tens of thousands of people had to die. We heard the head of the Wagner Group, Prigozhin. He said that he has plans to reach the channel, La Manche. If this doesn't make us increase the aid to Ukraine, I don't know what else would. The Czech Republic has already granted huge amount of military aid, and we will be continuing to help going forward. But we hear views of some countries like Switzerland that not only refuse to help Ukraine, but they actively block the aid of other countries. Such actions have to be refused, and we have to condemn those who are able to sacrifice our security for a few.
Thank you, Andrea Bocskor.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, Russia has been waging an illegal war for a year, and we stand up for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Europe at all forums. War caused death and broke the dreams of lives irrespective of nationalities and ethnicity. Romanians, Hungarians, and other nationalities all suffer from Russian aggression, and they fight for victory. Despite of all the difficulties, Ukraine continues on its path to Europe, and I hope that once all tasks are met, all chapters are met, then it will be able to join Europe according to the set criteria. However, the minority law is not in line with the European laws, therefore it needs to be modified. Tragic pictures are there on the screens everywhere, but we must not be tired of all these pictures. Words must not be emptied out. We need to focus on peace. We could not prevent the tragedy of the earthquake in Turkey, but we can do a lot for Ukraine. Thank you very much.
It's yours.
Szanowni Państwo, ladies and gentlemen, a year ago, millions of women, children, and refugees from Ukraine ended up in Polish homes because there was a bandit attack on their country. Not the first time, in fact. Our immediate reaction and our firm stance are still insufficient because it is the governments who hold the power. And as we heard, there is no time. Why are there even doubts on an embargo on energy? Why are Russian companies still operating in the European market? Anyone who supports them is Putin's ally and helper. So I call for immediate action from all governments. All Ukrainian requests should be implemented immediately because it is the Ukrainians who fight for us and for the future and peace of Europe. So this is why we are obliged to act. So I'd like to ask Madam van der Leyen also to take care of Moldova. This is a country which is also suffering because of this war and requires help. Thank you very much.
Unser nächster Redner.
Next up, Timosevich.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, the Russian aggression is ongoing. It still has tragic consequences, tens of thousands of dead and a destroyed economy. No one wanted this war. No one wants this war, but we are all affected by it. We need to help Ukraine for humanitarian legal reasons, but also for the reasons of our own security. The Ukrainians are defending themselves and us as well. We hear in this House calls for a diplomatic solution. Nobody ever mentions who and is going to pay for this price and for this peace and which price. Yes, negotiations are a good solution, but it's not always the case. In Munich, France and the UK traded the Czech Sudetenland for a year of peace, and a year later Germany attacked Poland and then attacked France as well. Is the Donbass and the Crimea supposed to be the Sudetenland? Do we want another aggressive country to attack more nations in Europe? We only have one choice, which is full support to Ukraine, which will stop the aggressor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dragos Tudorake.
Thank you, Chair, Madam President, dear High Representative, dear colleagues. 1 year ago, Russia unravelled a plan which we now know was in the making for many years. Putin's frustration with history went back to USSR, to the breakdown of Yugoslavia, to the Bucharest NATO summit, and in general, to the moment when he looked himself in the mirror and thought he was not big enough for the rest of the world to fear. Therefore, he had to rewrite history at any cost. And for that, he lied and he killed, and he will continue to lie and to kill until we give Ukraine the arms they need to stop him. In direct contrast, we heard President Zelensky speak to this House just last week. We all saw his determination and dedication to Ukraine's European hopes. This is the type of leader that is big enough, and not for the others to fear, but to follow and feel proud to bring at the EU table. We must continue to support him, match his level of ambition when it comes to EU integration, and be bolder in our actions. Be bold like Ukraine is. Thank you.
Thank you. Herr Wojciechowski.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. We keep asking the question why this war lasts so long. The answer is simple, because still too many of those who decide care more about future fate of Russia than about security of Ukraine. It's a paradox that the way to create peaceful and maybe democratic Russia is to defeat Putin's regime. The first step to achieve this goal is to help Ukraine not only to defend itself, but to defeat Russia. Free, democratic, sovereign Ukraine, member of the European Union, will be the best message for the Russian society that there is an alternative way of developing the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Das Wort gebeten.
Next up, Esteban González Pons.
Tengo un minuto tan corto como son los...
Now, a minute is as short as a minute of silence, but if we were to have a minute of silence for every one of Putin's victims, we wouldn't be saying anything this morning. And if we looked at the list of Putin's victims, it would take more than 4 hours. It would take more than 4 hours. This is a crime against humanity, and it's not happening at the doorstep of Europe. It's happening in Europe, here and now. Today, Ukrainians are pro-European as the French and German were after the Second World War, and for the same reasons. Young people are being told that there is no peace without paying a price, and that Democrats, they're being told, Democrats are saying that democracy is built every day, and that's also what Brexit scorned. There will be no democracy until the tyranny is trampled upon. That is why we are not going to give up. We know that that the war might be drawn out, but we cannot give up, and we will not surrender. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you. Herr Kollege Jens.
Next up, Jens Geier.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Thank you very much. High Representative, President, dear colleagues. A few days ago, many colleagues saw the first anniversary around the corner. I doff my hat to the bravery and courage of the Ukrainian people. It is up to the EU, and Josep Borrell pointed this out, that we increase the will for peace by giving the Ukrainians what they need: funds, humanitarian aid, military assistance. I firmly believe we should emphasize that we should take all these things together. What is the role of all these demands that Germany supply weapons? And many people in the plenary are keen on this. Once the preconditions have been laid down for a common procedure for NATO partners, Germany is set to provide hundreds of Leopard tanks. But what about our allies? The German defense minister said that this is not set to happen. Promises have been made. Norway and Portugal may be sitting, but what about the rest? we all need to set our shoulders to the wheel, each and every one of us. If everybody does their very best, then they will show that they are real allies and partners in NATO. Thank you. Hilde Voutmans.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, High Representative, almost 1 year on from the start of the war in Ukraine, we are seeing human drama and much suffering. We feel the impact too. Only one conclusion, and I think most previous speakers have said this, the only thing we can do in the face of authoritarian regime is to look to one solution. We need Ukraine to win, and Europe must stick firmly to its position. We need to send munitions, ammunition, tanks, and everything that Ukraine needs to Ukraine, and Europe needs to stand firm. I hear some member states talk about what they need to do for their own defence. We need to have a European defence union, not each going it alone, but a European defence market, European unity. And we're working now on a 10th package of sanctions. We'll have a look at problems here and there. Now we have a list of 6,000 names. Let's look at those 6,000 names. Let us stand together and tell Putin that you won't win the war. You will never win this war.
Am Wort ist nun Herr Siegfried.
Siegfried Muresan.
Vielen Dank. Thank you very much, Mr. President, President von der Leyen, High Representative. 1 year after the start of the war, we have to say clearly thank you to the people of Ukraine. The fight of the people of Ukraine is heroic. It is an inspiration to all of us. It is an inspiration to the free world, and we have the duty to say thank you. Our second duty is, as long as the people of Ukraine are fighting, we have to help them, we have to support them with all we can, soon, fast, because between the time we make a decision and the moment support gets on the ground, time passes. So we need to accelerate the speed of our decisions. The choice is not between war and peace. War is a terrible thing. None of us likes war. We all want peace. But the choice is between fighting or surrendering. And as long as the people of Ukraine are fighting, it is our duty to stand by their side. And it is also our duty to tell to the people of Europe that Russia is failing. Russia is losing militarily, economically, politically, and morally. Russia is talking about an imperialistic past which is long gone. We are building together a future for the people of Ukraine, for the people of Europe, and we are building it together. That's the difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Frau Vizepräsidentin.
Vice President Pina Picerno. Thank you very much, President von der Leyen, High Representative Borrell. A year on from the criminal invasion of the Ukraine, Putin has not managed to make the Ukrainian people bow. The Ukrainians are fighting for their independence and the very values of democracy and freedom that we are keen on. All of our assistance has not managed to halt this aggression. It behoves us to ratchet up our support. We should find ourselves wondering what the cost is to the Ukrainian people of our dithering. What is the cost to our international credibility? What is the cost of the unfortunate words we heard yesterday? Shameful words from Berlusconi levelled at Zelensky. I'm very ashamed, as well as the major resources we have earmarked. We also need to make brave political choices to punish Putin's criminal acts against the Ukrainians. We must support with every possible means the territorial integrity of Ukraine and see to it that this country has a future within our union. Next up, Andrius Kobilius.
Dear colleagues, this war can be stopped tomorrow if Mr. Putin will decide to withdraw his troops from Ukraine. However, since it is not realistic, the only way to end this international crime is to defeat Russia in the battlefield. The first year of a brutal war has shown that a combination of a highly motivated Ukrainian defenders and the Western weapons are much stronger than the Russian military capacity. That is why the delivery of the Western weapons is the most crucial factor which can bring the end of this war. I repeat, it depends only on the West how long this bloody war will continue. I am convinced the West has all the possibilities to help Ukraine to achieve its victory during this year. For that to happen, the West has to stop being afraid of Russian defeat impact on the future of Russia. On the contrary, in order to have a sustainable peace on the European continent, Russians need to be convinced to abandon their nostalgia to an empire. That will happen if Russia will be defeated in Ukraine, if Putin will be brought to international tribunal, and if Ukraine will be invited to join NATO. Slava Ukraini.
Danke, Herr Kollege. Wir kommen.
Thank you, colleague. Now we turn to catch the eye.
Speakers. So please accept the 1 minute, and I have to see you can take so much as possible. I will start with Francisco José Milán Mon.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you very much. We've had 1 year of a cruel and unjust war in Ukraine, but the sanctions we imposed on Russia, unfortunately, last year didn't have the effects we wanted, but let us hope that the oil measures will do something. This is a marathon, not a sprint, a low-release poison, as Mr. Borrell said. He gave us figures showing the slowing down of the Russian economy this month. However, we haven't isolated Russia economically. There are states that are helping it get the products and goods it needs and still buy its oil and gas. And they have improvised and come up with a fleet of cargo ships. Many countries who have condemned the aggression have to join the sanctions, but China and India contribute to propping up the Russian economy. I'm very pleased that recently the European Council committed to increasing the measures in order to fight against this. We'll have to look at the UN resolution and its scope. We have to continue weakening the Russian economy so it doesn't fuel the war machine that wreaks destruction and death.
López Aguilar.
President Carreras, un año de guerra.
A year of unfair and criminal war conducted by Putin against Ukraine. But you have to go back very many years to find a parliament where there was a very broad majority rallying behind leadership of this parliament has supported humanitarian measures for displaced people. We have supported the strategic autonomy and energy autonomy we need. We supported sanctions against Russia. We also provide military support to Ukraine. This is not warmongering. There's no contradiction in play here. We are just stressing that we Europeans are standing up for peace and standing up to an aggressor. We've spoke about a change of times, a Zeitwende in German. The European Union will tap into its leadership ability to be more united when it comes to common defence and security policy, to offset the social and economic costs of the sanctions for the most vulnerable people in the EU. We said we wanted a more perfect Europe when we signed up to the Lisbon Treaty. Let's hark back to that. Colleagues, if you fail to stick to 1 minute, I cannot take all colleagues, and I will have to take 5 off the list. Stick to time, otherwise I'll have to cut you off from the list. Heine Virkkonen.
Arvoisa puhemies, tulee kuluneeksi
Thank you, President. For a year now, Russia has been brutally attacking Ukraine. Over the course of the war, the European Union and its Western allies has shown unprecedented unity when it comes to imposing sanctions on Russia and assisting Ukraine. We need to step up those sanctions. For far too long, Europe relied on Russian energy, and that stymied any sanctions. Now we are preparing a 10th package of sanctions. We do need to bolster them. We need to step up the pace of military aid delivered to Ukraine, particularly when it comes to heavy weaponry and tanks. Promises were made, but those tanks now need to be delivered swiftly. The Ukrainian people are fighting for freedom and democracy. They need our assistance. We need to help Ukraine in its battle and its path towards Europe. Thank you. Guy Reuten.
Thank you, President. And thank you, High Representative Borrell, for your leadership on this and for your personal commitment in the past years. We have to stop to give Ukraine just enough not to lose. We need to give Ukraine what it needs to win as soon as possible. That's our task, not after the summer, not next month, now. We have to stop the incrementalism on both the sanctions and the military support. So now on the tanks. I want to ask you, High Representative, if you can take an initiative to coordinate this, because since the decision about the tanks, we heard, no, not the least tanks. No, we have some tanks in the mothballs that we want to refurbish. We need to coordinate this in a European way, in a European spirit, to get these tanks as soon as possible in Ukraine, and to also use currently operational used tanks for that matter. So I would be very appreciative if you could take initiative on that. Thank you, and Slava Ukraini.
Thank you. Mr. Alexandrov, Yordanov Alexander.
Благодаря, господин председател.
Thank you, President. What have we learned for the last 12 months? 1. Military assistance, when timely, is more relevant to peace than diplomacy. 2. Peace is possible only after the last Russian soldier leaves Ukraine. 3. Whoever speaks about peace today is actually helping Putin. 4. Mr. Borrell, your words were very convincing today, but those had to be your words in Moscow a year ago. Peace is impossible as long as Putin is in Kremlin. And finally, I hope that the Bulgarian parliament will have worthy members who will insist on an impeachment of the pro-Russian Bulgarian president. Thank you.
Maria Grappini.
Domnule președinte, domnule înalt reprezentant, vreau să încep prin a vă...
Thank you very much. I would like to start off by congratulating you, Mr. Borrell, because in your speech you made this extraordinary statement. You uttered the word peace. I don't agree with those colleagues who say that if we talk about peace, we're helping Putin. No, we're just making sure that there are less victims. Let's think about the UN. Putin killed many people, and I don't agree with what we heard here when speakers said that weapons help. Weapons kill, Mr. Borrell. That's why we have to continue along this path. We have to make sure that we continue our dialogue with NATO. We have to help the Republic of Moldova. My country shares a border with Ukraine. We need to help this country. We need to help Ukrainian citizens as Europe has done. We have to find a way to put an end to this catastrophe.
Demirel Özlem is our next speaker.
Dankeschön, Herr Präsident. Seit einem...
Thank you, President. For a year, we have seen war ravage Ukraine. For a year, people have been dying in Ukraine. A year of warfare is a year of a brutal battle between NATO and Russia on Ukrainian territory. Yesterday, Mr. Stoltenberg said that this war could have been forecast back in 2014. That begs the question, why was everything not thrown at preventing this war? Yes, Russia did invade Ukraine and should be condemned. But what has NATO done since then? It has stepped up ammunition, verbal and actual ammunition. What about peace negotiations? The US and others torpedoed negotiations in Turkey last year. So your behaviour has nothing to do with peace. Show real solidarity with people in Ukraine. Stop pursuing your geopolitical interests and putting that above lives of individuals. Thank you, Kostas Papadakis.
For 1 year now, the EU and member state governments have said that the imperialist war in Russia is a single-act play, but it is actually part of the clash between NATO, US and the EU on the one hand and capitalist Russia on the other, on the battlefield of monopolies. And the victims are the Ukrainian and Russian people that for centuries lived side by side during the Soviet Union. Both sides are capitalist. The Greek Communist Party has condemned Euro-Atlantic interventions and the coup in Ukraine in 2014 and the unacceptable Russian invasion, and is fighting hard in order to avoid the New Democracy government involving Greece with the support of Syriza to make sure that Greece isn't used as a NATO springboard. We need to disengage from Euro-Atlantic interests and power. Thank you.
Stevesa.
Mr. Ruiz Teveza.
Thank you very much, President Otmar Karas. Thank you likewise to the High Representative for his intervention this morning. I really do concur with the idea that diplomacy is also a tool we can tap into alongside the military assistance which the Ukraine needs. We must keep bearing in mind that the final goal is to achieve a fair peace. So the Ukraine should win back its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Looking at today's Financial Times, it says Russia masses aircraft within striking range of Ukrainian targets. We have not been quick enough to act. The tanks and the fighter jets are coming too late. We don't know how long the conflict will last. This strategy could have been even more efficient. The war has lasted a year and the Ukraine has won back half of the territory initially occupied by the Ukraine. Let's do more and swiftly.
Thank you, Fulvio Marchicello.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. When I arrived in the European Parliament this morning, I thought I would find a full chamber, a chamber full of members of the European Parliament listening to speeches, everyone focused on reiterating and bolstering the position of the European Parliament vis-à-vis Ukraine, in other words, condemning Russian aggression. But so many colleagues have decided not to take part in this debate. This chamber is very sadly semi-deserted, and some colleagues prevented political controversy to a deep reflection over what 1 year of war means. Forza Italia has always used votes and actions to condemn the invasion of Ukraine. There isn't a single act in this European Parliament that shows anything different. Some socialist colleagues, instead of using the time given to them in order to speak about the invasion of Ukraine, used their speaking time to attack Italy and political leaders such as Silvio Berlusconi. They've made a mistake, and I hope they've understood that.
Kollege Lukasz Kohut.
Lukasz Kohut.
Rok inwazji Putina.
1 year from Putin's invasion is a year of tragedy and sadness. Millions have fled their country and thousands were killed, brutally killed. Like the 14-year-old boy with his dog killed during a walk in Bakhmut. I got the photograph from a photographer from my region who is documenting the Russian crimes. Volodymyr Klitschko said that this is a civilizational war, that Russia treats Ukraine as something that is worse. and that is why they want to destroy the language, the society, and the culture. We do want peace. I am a pacifist myself, but it is really difficult to be a pacifist when such an unjustified war is taking place just outside our borders. The only peace that we can accept in this parliament is a Ukrainian victory over Russia and more weapons for Ukraine. Now, as long as it's not too late. Long live a free Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Frau Kollegin Katarina
della Roba.
Mr. President, I'm fascinated and we're discussing such a topic of war in Ukraine. My colleagues in the EPP are using it to attack us as political opponents. I believe we should talk about things such as the sacrifice of citizens of the EU who live at the border with Ukraine. For instance, citizens of Slovakia, Poland, also Romania, people who opened their homes, offered help, also volunteered. And very often these people really didn't have much themselves, and yet they were willing to share this little they own when the governments were failing. So I would like to thank all these people for their help, and I'd like to mention them, their contribution. I think it's important. And I also believe that these people do not want to talk about weapons. They want to talk about peace. So I think we politicians should talk about the fact that the peace project that the European Union is should be really significant and help Ukraine finish and end this war, because all those women and children suffering day in, day out is just awful.
We'll now finish up Catch the Eye with Mr. Olekash.
Thank you, Chairman. Dear colleagues, most of us agree that the EU and our partners should increase and speed up support to Ukraine. As High Representative, you said our military aid must include everything that is needed for Ukraine to defeat Russia's army and regain full control of its territory, including air defense system, fighter jets, and long-range missile system. As President of the Commission said, we need to implement new sanction package, but it's not enough. The EU also needs to take a stronger position on any individual or entity is helping Russia to avoid imposed sanctions. Any company in EU or in that country that is trying to profit from the war situation should be placed under criminal investigation. Its assets freezed and confiscated, and its owners tried in the court as supporters of terrorism. At the same time, we must show that the EU is ready to start negotiations with Ukraine for accession to the EU process this year. Дякую, Ukraine. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you. Ich komme nun nach.
We'll now move on to our second last speaker on this item. Firstly, the Commission representative, Commission Sinkovicius.
Thank you, President, High Representative, honourable members. First of all, let me thank this House for today's debate and for your interventions, because this is an important moment, an emotional one too, and a moment of determination. It was important to have this debate today. It gives us, European Commission, European Parliament and Council, an opportunity to strongly reconfirm our full support to Ukraine, to reiterate our unconditional solidarity, and to do everything it takes, as long as it takes, to undermine Russia's war machine. Each of us, literally everyone, remembers where were we when we heard the horrible news 1 year ago. I remember very well. I never imagined the moment in my life that I will wake up my wife and say the war started. The first thing we did, we called our parents, but by that time they were already somewhere deep in shelter. I will never forget those hours waiting for their reply. Unfortunately, those hours, they will stick deep in me for many, many years. The 24th of February 2022 changed this world. It changed each and every of us. And we would probably not have imagined that we would stand here today having this debate. 357 days into a brutal war. Mariupol, Bakhmut, once a thriving, beautiful European cities, today they don't exist. From the very beginning, Putin's condition for peace, so-called peace, to wipe out Ukraine, their culture, their tradition, their people. Are you ready to look Ukrainian children in the eye and say, rape, loot is their future? Because that would mean that's the future of our children too. So let me say again, today's debate was important, as we cannot repeat and reconfirm our support and solidarity often enough. Any support of ours will never match the sacrifice of the Ukrainian nation. President von der Leyen has made it very clear that we will continue as long as it takes to keep Ukrainians' dream of freedom alive, to praise the legendary bravery of the Ukrainian people, to bring Ukraine closer to victory and closer to the European Union, where they truly belong. We continue to bring our markets closer, our towns and our cities, our people. We have built bridges, and we continue to build more of them, building Ukrainians' European future together. And reconstruction is going to be another chance to show a true European solidarity, build Ukraine even back better, greener and stronger, rebuild the beauty of Ukraine. We need to lay the groundwork for a green reconstruction, holding Russia accountable, also for all damage that they have done. And I truly hope that in 1 year, this debate will be about our efforts to rebuild Ukraine. Honourable members, President von der Leyen has said it. Ukraine's dreams of freedom are stronger than ever. I can only confirm this. I can confirm this personally. Today's debate has sent a very strong message. We will help Ukraine so that these dreams one day become a reality. We will stand united. We will not only not allow Putin to divide us, his attempts to divide us have failed, and we will make sure they will never succeed. Because today has shown again that we are united in our firm belief that Ukraine's future will be a European one. We owe this unity to Ukraine, to their children, and to our children too. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
Danke vielmals.
Thank you. We'll now hear from the Commission Vice President and High Representative, Josep Borrell Fonteles.
Thank you, Vice President Kallas. Thank you to all members that are following this debate. Thank you, colleague. Vice President, for this debate to have a fully sense, I should be able to try to answer what I heard from the members that have intervened, because they have said very interesting things. So I ask for your help if I take some minutes more, because I think I have to answer and we have to share your views. Otherwise, it's not a debate. Let's switch to Spanish, it will be quicker. Algunos de ustedes han dicho.
Some of you have said that we didn't react after Crimea. Yes, you're right. It's true. After Crimea, we imposed some economic sanctions, not too many, and we continued purchasing Russian gas. We continued increasing our dependence on Russia, and we continued building Nord Stream. It's true. But you cannot rewind history. We're not going to solve the problems of today by self-flagellating over problems committed in the past. We have to assume our responsibility and correct them. And someone mentioned a shopping list. Oh, you've come here asking for tanks, munitions, and so on. This is what you said that President Zelensky did. What would you do? You would go where you had to go and ask for help. And that's what the assistance... Yes, it's true that weapons kill. That's why they're made for that. And we know that. We know that, unfortunately, our military aid does lead to a loss of lives. But the problem with Zelensky is that too many people applaud him, but he doesn't have enough munitions. Enough with rounds of applause and Slava Ukraini. There's a lot of that, but his troops don't have the weapons they need. Do you know why? Because it's applause is for free, but a Leopard costs thousands of euros. Why don't we look at each other in the eye and say, we should be doing more. We should be committing to more. We need additional resources to make sure that those immobile tanks are taken out of headquarters and sent to Ukraine before the spring-summer offensive. Now, this is what we're discussing, and you have a role to play here. My role is to keep member states united, because all sanctions have to be adopted by unanimity, and every single euro that comes out or is disbursed from the European peace facility is based on unanimity, and I have to keep 27 member states united. And believe me, it's not always easy, and sometimes we have to make exceptions, and sometimes we have to accept behavior that we don't like, because we need to stand united. And you can also help in this regard. Some of you have said, and I accept it, and I assume this responsibility, that we have to do more and do it more quickly, and we have to convince European public opinion of the need to do this. Others have leveled criticism against the excessive incrementalism of our aid, and I understand this criticism. If we had done what we're doing now earlier, we would have saved lives, and it would have been easier to defend Ukraine. Some believe that the solution is based on stopping military aid, and they're not here to hear my reply. I don't understand how the left can ask for us to put an end to military assistance to Ukraine. I can't get my head around it. I don't understand this pro-Putinism or this extreme naivete on behalf of the left. And I do have friends who believe this, and people that I respect intellectually. But do you really believe that if we didn't provide Ukraine with the munitions that they need every day, every hour to continue defending themselves, do you really think that that would push Putin to the negotiating table? Or do you not think that it will make them increase their military offensive? Please make sure you've got your feet on the ground. It's time to wake up. Every single death caused by a weapon hurts me deeply, but if we want the war to be shorter, the solution is not to help Ukraine less, but to help them more and in a swifter manner. The war is dragging out because there's a stalemate, and we have to break this deadlock, and sanctions have to help this. A lot of people have criticized the effects of the sanctions. I'm going to insist on this. If anyone thought that sanctions would stop the war machine financially overnight, then I'm sorry, you just live in a different world. So there is a slow impact, but it's steady, and the figures speak volumes. They speak for themselves. Last year was a year that was particularly good for the Russian treasury, but that's because energy prices soared and we still depended on Russia. But this year, the figures show that the revenues are plummeting. The deficit is going up, the trade balance is suffering, and Europe's technological independence is bringing about results. Some have said that at the end of the day, it's just NATO that counts if we want to defend Europe. And that raises, once again, the debate on NATO and the strategic independence of Europe. Yes, NATO plays a very important role, but we cannot shy away from our own responsibilities. We need to have military capabilities we didn't have, because we were used to the dream of peace, and that is why our warehouses and depots were not full, but yet the war is back, and we have to tackle it. Now, there were mentions of Iran and the role that Iran plays in backing Russia, but we also have to understand how the rest of the world thinks, and we're going to see this next week at the United Nations. Because not everyone thinks the way we do, and not everyone has the same assessment of the impact of this war. I'm fortunate enough to meet leaders in Latin America, Southeast Asia, Africa, and many have swallowed the Russian propaganda and the disinformation that says that increased food prices and energy prices are because of our sanctions, and we have to explain that it's not the case. Food prices go up when those who are saying that they're going up are blocking wheat from leaving Ukrainian ports. It's extremely important to educate. It's important to raise awareness, because whether we like it or not, in Africa there is strong anti-colonial sentiment and a strong anti-imperialist sentiment in Latin America, and that means that a lot of its inhabitants and leaders see the war through different eyes. Now, the reality is multifaceted. I'm not saying we have to impose our reality, but we've got to convince with arguments. I tried to bring figures to this debate because I think that these facts underpin the arguments that our policies are based on. I've never seen a country that have had their existential hopes pinned on Europe so much. For those people who have not had freedom because of dictatorships like mine, the EU was seen as a beacon of freedom and for the future. But I've never seen a country where belonging to the EU hasn't had this existentialist dimension as the Ukraine. And that is why, in French, we have to provide support to this European dream, even though we know that the road will be long and winding, because to get peace we need to win the war. But when I say that we have to win the war, it doesn't mean that we forget or that we will ignore the diplomatic efforts in Spanish. These are not contradictory elements. We have to do both at the same time. Diplomatic efforts and military aid, we have to think about what security will be like in Europe after this is over. What is the role of Europe? Because I don't want it just to be China, the US and other countries to do everything to bring an end to the war. We have to think about how we're going to rebuild a destroyed Ukraine, but we also have to think about cooperation and communication on the European continent. We'll probably need new Russian leaders that will assume their responsibilities and assume the responsibility of what they've done, and that will be able to take their country towards reconciliation and a common future. In the same way as after the Second World War in Europe, we had leaders that managed to push forward with reconciliation and reconstruction. And that is why we have to double down our efforts to focus on this. Everyone, you too, this debate has been extremely important because it has opened my eyes to the fact that there are still members of this parliament that think that what we're doing is the wrong thing. And I would like you to tell me what the alternative is. Look me in the eyes and tell me that you accept that Russian troops will go into Kiev and set up Belarus-like regime, because that is going to be what will happen if we stop providing military aid to Ukraine. And since we don't want this, we have to continue harnessing our sanctions, this slow-acting poison that is undermining the Russian economy. And we have to continue providing military support to Ukraine. We have to not do it very slowly and steadily, but quickly. And we have to take more risks. And let me tell you that we're in the midst of a war. We're not waging the war. It's not our young people who are dying in Kiev, but it is a war that affects us because our security hinges on the outcome of the war. And as President Macron said, that we don't have this mentality of a war economy, and we should, because otherwise we have the political decisions that we have to take, and I hope that the European Parliament will support the decisions that have to be taken.
Thank you very much indeed to the High Representative, Mr. Borrell. And thank you, of course, to everybody who took part in the debate. There were 6 resolutions put forward for the end of the discussion. The vote will be tomorrow. Now, Council and Commission statements next on the Green Deal Industrial Plan for the Net Zero Age. Let's set the ball rolling on our debate. On behalf of the Council, the Minister for EU Affairs, Rosvall.
President, honourable members, Commissioner, thank you for the opportunity to address this chamber. Today we are witnessing uncertain times in Europe and globally. This is putting our economies under intense strain and requires new ways of thinking and decisive collective action. That is why today's debate about the Commission's communication on a Green Deal industrial plan is very timely. The Commission's plans provides a basis for us to reflect on what we need to do in the short term to strengthen our industrial and technological base. We also need to analyse further the potential negative consequences from actions taken by other global actors. But even more importantly, we cannot simply react to external events. If we want the EU to be a leader in a clean tech and other fields, we have to be proactive and get serious about strengthening our productivity in the long term. Therefore, it is essential that we start work on removing barriers for productivity and productivity-enhancing investments in clean and digital technologies. Predictable and competitive conditions for our companies across the EU will help us to become the front-runner of the green and digital transition. With these purposes in mind, the Special European Council last week underlined the need to intensify the work along several strands actions. For instance, we need to simplify the regulatory framework and shorten administrative procedures. This is crucial to ensure that we need to have the necessary manufacturing capacity to reach the EU's climate-neutral goals. And to ensure a successful green and digital transition in Europe, we need to equip citizens with the appropriate skills. We have to take ambitious actions to provide education, training, upskilling and reskilling. In order to grow and thrive, businesses also need access to capital. Existing EU funds can play a part, but even more important is private investment. Therefore, we need to finalise the Capital Market Union to make sure that Europe can remain a continent of production and innovation. But we cannot stop at Europe's borders. To be world-leading, European companies must have access to world markets. Thus, the European Council stressed the importance of supporting the WTO and a multilateral rule-based system for trade. Fair and transparent free trade and investment agreements should allow resilient and reliable supply chains to develop and the European Union to access new markets. These are fundamental pillars for drawing up a Green Deal industrial plan for a net zero age. Last but not least, let me add the work we took forward to the Commission's proposal. We look forward to the Commission's proposal for a long-term strategy at the EU level to boost competitiveness and productivity. Working on the long-term challenges and of increasing productivity will be crucial for attracting investment as well as safeguarding our businesses and industries' ability to compete globally. This is a discussion that we will come back to many times during the spring and indeed in the coming years. It is about making our economy more future-proof and recover the lost ground. Despite the pressing issues of the day, this is a challenge we must tackle now. Thank you very much for your attention.
Grazie.
Thank you very much, Minister. Next up, on behalf of the Commission, Mairead McGuinness.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, colleagues, and good morning, Minister. I think we all know that this is a decisive decade. By 2030, we plan to cut emissions by 55%, and that this work started 3 years ago with the European Green Deal. We set out a very detailed roadmap, Fit for 55, and we accelerated our work with Next Generation EU, using €800 billion worth of investment to emerge from the pandemic with a stronger, more sustainable Europe. Russia's war of aggression requires us to accelerate again this work, as Putin's weaponising of his country's energy exports in a failed attempt to weaken our resolve. But this is a difficult time for European citizens, for families and businesses. Europe is being tested by war, by geopolitical tensions, by trade rivalries and climate change. We need to show that we can step up to these challenges, and we need to continue to show our resolve as we work towards 2030 and net zero by 2050. Half the emissions we need to cut by 2050 depend on technology not yet ready for market, or technology that does not yet exist. That is a challenge, but it is also an opportunity. The EU's net zero startups were worth over €100 billion in 2021, twice as much as they were worth the year before, and that will keep growing. Economic growth, competitiveness and innovation on the one hand, sustainability on the other. These objectives are not in conflict. But we need the right environment in Europe to make sure these goals support and build on each other. On February the 1st, the Commission presented a Green Deal industrial plan to make Europe the home of clean tech and innovation on the road to net zero. It is built on 4 pillars: the regulatory environment, financing, skills and trade. And I want to just briefly go through those 4 pillars. First, on the regulatory environment. This is about speed and access. We need to enable the clean tech industry to scale up and to scale up fast. We know that companies complain that permitting is too slow and there are too many barriers to bringing innovations to market. So one of our main measures will be a new Net Zero Industry Act. That will, for example, look at how to fast-track permitting for clean tech production sites. Second, financing, money. We need to speed up investment in clean tech production. We will adopt our state aid rules to speed up and simplify processes on a temporary basis for the decarbonisation of industries and for sectors we need to reach net zero. We will have easier calculations, simpler procedures and accelerated approvals. But we will also pay attention to the level playing field in the single market. Not all member states have the same capacity to use state aid. As we mark 30 years of that single market, we should recognise the value of our state aid rules for all member states, big and small. So our temporary rules will allow for time-limited, proportionate and targeted state aid, where that's necessary to roll out renewable energy, decarbonise industry and support investment in strategic sectors for net zero. Public funding is important, but it will not by itself be sufficient. The bulk of the money to fund green techs and clean techs will not come from the public purse, but from private investors. The US has the Inflation Reduction Act, but it also has thriving capital markets that secure the country's competitiveness. Here in the European Union, we need the same. We need the Capital Markets Union, and we need to accelerate our work. And I want to thank colleagues in this House who are working hard on our proposals for CMU. because it is about allowing businesses to access more sources of funding as they start out. It's about making sure that startups born in Europe can scale up in Europe. It's about giving investors more opportunities to invest in different projects and companies, including green tech and clean tech. The third part of the Green Deal Industrial Plan is skills. We cannot do any of this work without the necessary people. We need people to drive the clean tech revolution. We will need 800,000 skilled workers by 2025 in the battery industry, 1 million skilled workers by 2030 in the solar industry, twice as many as there are today. This is a chance to create well-paying, skilled jobs for the future. And this is the absolute priority in this European Year of Skills. Fourth and finally, we are focusing on trade because we want to deliver net zero at the global level. We need strong and resilient supply chains to access raw materials, to open up markets for our products. We need an ambitious trade agenda, making the most of the deals that we have and closing deals that we are negotiating. So in closing, President, honourable members, I know we face challenging times, but it is in times like this that the European Union does its best work. I look forward to your views on how we can turn this Green Deal industrial plan into a reality so that Europe reaches net zero by 2050 and leads the way as a net zero industrial powerhouse. Thank you.
Grazie. Thank you very much to the Commissioner. Now, for the EPP, Christian Ehler.
Ladies and gentlemen, in 2020, the Commission proudly announced a new industrial policy to implement the European Green Deal as a growth strategy. Yet it took a loud bang from the US to wake up the von der Leyen Commission. 3 years later, they finally woke up to the fact that simply placing Fit for 55 regulation is not enough. We need a business case for the European industry that the industrial transition will be a success. The EPP Group welcomes, therefore, the Green Deal industrial plan, but the EPP Group really wants to make sure that the von der Leyen Commission hears this final warning shot loud and clear. So far, the Commission approach has to be too prescriptive, too ideological, and too much focused on regulating the demand side of the European market. Technology neutrality was an afterthought rather than a leading principle. What we need is a serious effort to create a regulatory framework that gives our industry certainty and freedom to innovate and invest. This requires simple, fast, predictable decisions on state aid and permitting, for example, on domestic sourcing of raw materials. Productivity is our industry's competitive advantage, not even mentioned in the statement from the Commission. Our social and energy costs are among the highest in the world, but so is also the quality of our scientists and engineers. We need to address these high costs, but most importantly, we need to unleash the potential of our innovation-driven productivity growth. To ensure our competitiveness on the global market, we also need an ambitious free trade agenda. And yes, we want to ratify the pending trade agreements. If the von der Leyen Commission if the von der Leyen Commission realises what needs to happen, the European economy can thrive and provide quality jobs for our citizens also in the future. And only if our economy thrives, the European Green Deal can be a success. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker for S&D, García Pérez.
Thank you, President. Honourable members, the subsidy race has begun. The US, China, Japan, India are all competing in the same race. We welcome the fact that allies such as the US are pushing towards an emissions-free world. However, the European Union cannot allow uneven tracks that breach WTO rules. The time has come for a response. We are lagging behind in areas such as manufacturing microchips or the digital economy. Not a single social media or digital heavyweight is European in origin. The Green Deal industrial plan tabled by the European Commission cannot be a wasted opportunity. Its current makeup ignores workers' rights and its financing is in limbo. We need to seize the opportunity of the digital and green revolution to modernise our economies. The most pressing step is to reform electricity markets, because the current design is a major problem hampering European industry. We also need to overhaul the state aid model to allow for a swifter rollout of strategic projects under national recovery plans in sectors that guarantee greater strategic technological and energy autonomy, clean energies, for example, semiconductors and electric vehicles. However, changing state aid rules is about more than tweaking thresholds. We need an instrument that evens out differences in size and fiscal headspace between member states. Under no circumstances can we allow the global subsidy race to become an intra-EU race between member states, fragmenting our single market. Now, we also need to look at adopting green financing, galvanising public and private investment. We need to look, perhaps support to national budgets could be tied to appropriate fiscal rules, revamped Stability and Growth Pact, and we could look at mobilising green financing based on the successful SURE programme. The Green Industrial Plan will only be a success if we protect the lifeblood of European industry. That lifeblood has pumped European industry for 2 centuries. The working classes, the workers. Without workers, there is no industry. Any company receiving state aid must foster labour rights, robust salaries, decent working conditions, collective bargaining and trade union rights. Honourable members, the top priority for the Green Industrial Plan must be to compete effectively with the US and China, not to have competition between member states within the single market. There is no better way to mark the 30th anniversary of the single market than to help bring about the birth of a new European industry, competitive, sustainable, digital industry that respects the dignity of the working class. Thank you.
Thank you for Renew. Séjourné.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, the risk of competitiveness going down is no longer looming on the horizon because we're working urgently and we welcome the first decisions taken by the Council. But there's a difference between the Inflation Reduction Act of the US and our political response, and especially when it comes to China. We are hesitating, and yet our competitors are decisive and are thinking over 5, 10, 20 years. We need a clear path and a clear response. We need a joint response for our single market, and our economy needs more Europe. More Europe when it comes to state aid is joint projects funded by a sovereignty fund. More Europe in our competition policy, and this is what the US and China are doing the equivalent. We have to stop being naive. Our key rivals have to respect our socio-economic standards. We need to have a new trade policy that is based on democracy and exporting our values, our social and environmental standards. That has to be the bedrock of future trade policies. More Europe in our industrial strategy is to vote the Net Zero Industry Act as quickly as possible, but we also have to work on overhauling the energy market, and I'd like all groups to commit to looking at this carefully. Our economy cannot wait. Look at the inflation rate and purchasing power problems. And more Europe also means more cohesion and a more efficient single market and carbon neutrality. Some groups might be tempted to unravel the Green Deal, but this is absurd at a time that the US has actually jumped on our bandwagon and has adopted the same point of view when it comes to the green transition and is throwing money at it. The EPP, I hear, is not going to vote in favor of this resolution. I don't know whether this is an internal political strategy or in order to make it difficult for the President of the European European Commission for internal EPP reasons or out of cynicism, but I think that the EPP delegations have to assume their responsibility vis-à-vis our industry, energy transition, the future jobs, and I hope, colleagues in the EPP, that there will be responsible delegations among you. We would like to appeal to you. Vote in favour of the EP resolution for a new model for emergency measures. We can do much more and much better. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up for the Greens, Bas Eickhout.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, and also thank you to the Commission for their Green Deal industrial plan that they have launched. And it brings, of course, right to the discussion where it should be. It is about Europeans' competitiveness. But some people in this room are defining competitiveness purely as productivity that needs to go down, productivity costs that need to go down. This is a race to the bottom. This is a race to the bottom, undermining our workforce and the quality of our life. That's also what you're undermining. You are undermining that European way of life. And this is also why we should be more proud of Europe. The World Competitiveness Ranking has on number 1 Denmark. So apparently something is going right in Europe. And when you read the reasoning, it's because Denmark has been very at the forefront of a sustainability policy, a predictable policy that is showing the way for our industry where we should be going. And that's exactly what we need in Europe. We are not having a problem with bureaucracy. We are having a problem with a divided, fragmented Europe, and a Europe that is not clear and predictable, and that needs to be fixed. And this is also why the Green Deal Industrial Plan is a good start, but we need more from the Commission to make sure where our industry can go to. Not only with public funding, there we need public funding, but we also need more clarity on private funding. I just mentioned a green finance agenda that seems to be lost. But on the last point, people, we need a European vision on where we want to go, because 27 fragmented national visions on our industry, that's killing our industry. We need a European answer, and we need that together also in a European Parliament that is united on that vision. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up for ID Zanni.
Grazie.
Thank you very much, President. As I see it, the Green Industrial Plan from the Commission has two faults. Firstly, its very idea, and secondly, when it comes to the direction it's heading in. I will explain why. Firstly, let's look at hanging on the coattails of the USA. That's completely wrong. We are not the USA. We don't have the same tools. We do not have the same structure. And we should not be aping what's being done on the other side of the Atlantic. That's shooting ourselves in the foot from the start. Secondly, I think there's a slippery slope we've embarked on, or rather which the Commission has embarked on. We are turning back to economic and industrial planning systems which have not proved their worth in the past. And I'm very concerned because today the Commission is tabling plans and industrial plans and initiatives laying down the law to industry as to what they should do and precisely how to do it. I don't think that's very efficient in a free market like the EU. Thirdly, and this is even more important, this is the very kernel of the issue. The current EU transition means we are forsaking the principles which belong in any such system or plan. In other words, technological neutrality. This means we are no longer talking about how to whittle down CO2 emissions. We are placing all our bets on a technology which is which we're not sure is the best one, and we are investing in this technology and research into it. Finally, what can we feasibly do right now? Talking to investors and companies, the first obstacle to free liquidity in the EU is that of the tremendous amount of red tape and regulations which stifle industry. We need to slash regulation and make things more streamlined. That's an essential step we can really take right now, so that industry does not just toddle away from Europe. So we will lose production within our bounds. Now for the ECR, Krasnodębski.
Un minuto.
Dziękuję, pani przewodnicząca.
Thank you, Chair. This communication by the European Commission is very one-sided. In fact, we need a plan, but we need a more developed and a more complex plan, because our economy, our industrial basis, well, they differ. So we need a realistic strategy for this real economy, not for the economy that the Commission has been dreaming about and that will come into existence in 20, 30 years. Now, in recent years, what the Commission has done in the light of the war has diverted from its plans for the future. But did the Commission take into account, when writing the plan, that the war might take years? And these leopards will have to be produced at some point. So we should also have a strategy for the steel industry. And can such an economy be really innovative and effective? Despite declarations, there are more and more regulations. And unfortunately, I have to say that it looks more like a centrally run economy that I know from the past, which does not increase your productivity. It's not innovative.
Thank you. Now for the left, Mr. Sherdewan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The Inflation Reduction Act is a nightmare for all those who are pro our transatlantic relationship. Joe Biden has put America first and the industrial future. So we are now looking at aggressive tax dumping. And so everything that's been said by the Conservatives, they want to see more free trade, but this is really just bullshit. So what we need is a radical rethinking of our European industrial policy. We have to change our old deficit and debt rules and state aid rules and our future investment rules as well as public procurement. Our people need proper investment. They need good jobs. They need an industrial future which is clean and sustainable. Our people need electricity, they need heating, they need functional transport in the future. They have the right to education, to health. What we need is an industrial policy for the 99%. The Commission has reacted to the situation in the US, but I think everything you have put out here has not properly been thought through. The IRA is a massive investment plan. It helps multinational companies. It's working from the top down, but what we need is a sustainable future. Sustainability is the right way for the EU. We need to have the right social conditions. We need to have fair wages. We need to have education. We need to have the right labour conditions. We need to have the right protection for our workers and climate protections as well. These are not contradictory. They go together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before I give the floor to Ms. Begin, I have an announcement. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, we will not be having the blue card or catch the procedure. Thank you. Ms. Begin. Thank you, President, Commissioner. The Five-Star Movement shares the aims of the Green Deal Industrial Plan. But we do have some questions about the path that's been chosen to achieve these aims. We agree on the end, but not the means, or at least not completely. The US Inflation Reduction Act has provided subsidies and tax reductions to the tune of $370 million. But what we find to be of most concern is the way European businesses have been left out of this support. This is out-and-out unfair competition, and we've been saying that for weeks. We're friends and allies of the United States, and friends and allies owe one another respect. A DIY policy with increased flexibility around state aid rules isn't enough. This would create distortion and damage our European single market. We do, however, support the proposal for a European sovereignty fund, but this must be financed by issuing joint debt. The EU budget is at capacity, and member states cannot be asked to contribute more. Defending our competitiveness is not an expense, it's an investment, a necessary one, in the very survival of the European Union. Thank you. Thank you. I would ask you please to stick to your time because we are very behind. Del Castillo Vera, you have the floor.
President, Commissioner, we are talking about to boost industrial competitiveness. This means, first, we have to foster green and digital transition, but at the same time, increase our competitiveness on the global market. We cannot only focus on building windmills. We are leaders in the chemical sector and account with a competitive manufacturing industry. All important sectors of the competitiveness must be included in an industrial strategy. Second, we have to ensure fast permitting procedures and predictability to set up new projects while reducing the administrative burden to a minimum. Third, we need affordable prices for energy. The reform of the electricity market will be instrumental, but equally important will be to kickstart the clean hydrogen market to include low-carbon hydrogen as a transition energy. Lastly, we need to avoid fragmentation in the single market, and any European fund must be integrated in the MFF after a clear assessment of the costs and investment gaps. Thank you very much.
Grazie. Ora facoltà di intervenire l'onorevole Agius.
Thank you, Mr. Agius Saliba. You have the floor.
Grazie, Signora President.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's very important that we accelerate the transition, the Green Deal transition in our economies, while we ensure that we keep in Europe quality jobs. This is a step in the right direction. However, the Commission's Commission on the Industrial Strategy certainly needs much more ambition and solid work. If this is our ambition as to our reaction to the American Act, I say that we are trying to solve the problem by only throwing more money at the problem and by only proposing to decrease European legislation. This is not going to give us solutions to the challenges we're facing. The relaxation of state aid rules without monitoring, evaluation, without conditions will not work. It will create more divergences and inequalities between the richer and the poorer, between the different regions in Europe, the richer and the poorer, and the ones which are furthest away. I expect more from the European Union, more commitment in favour of equality, in favour of families, in favour of environmental justice, quality. Equal quality, just conditions, the involvement of trade unions, the respect of the collective agreements, and less degradation of conditions of work for our workers. These should be central in our industrial strategy. Thank you.
Facoltà ora di intervenire l'onorevole Di Labaiova.
Thank you. Ms. Labaiova has the floor.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Commissioner. I am proud.
Commissario. Jaké hodnoty v Evropě vytvářejí a co pro náš kontinent dělají. A jsem hrdá na evropský společný trh. Evropa je krůček.
I'm proud of the European Common Market. Europe has been building the market step by step for 30 years, and it is one of the greatest achievements of European integration. We have to cherish it. The world around us is changing, and we need a quick, comprehensive response where all details have to be aligned. Our businesses need instant access to finance, fast approval processes, skills, innovation. real investment and simplification. All of that is on the table, so let's go for it. Help is needed, but it must be targeted, adequate and temporary. Let us avoid steps that will lead to protectionism, undermine the created internal market and put yet another burden on our businesses, namely SMEs. The common market must remain fair. It has to guarantee a level playing field, and it has to be stable and comprehensible. After all, that's what it is all about. We have to support our businesses and not to put obstacles in their way. Thank you.
Onorevole Cavazzini, prego.
Thank you, Ms. Cavazzini.
Yeah, dear colleagues, the EU Green Deal is a success story, and so successful that other continents are following suit. Finally, the global race for climate technology and net zero industry is on. And one way to react to this race is to attempt to solve today's problems with outdated solutions from the past, like some in this House, who seriously want to pause the Green Deal and to massively deregulate. And this is like putting on the ballroom shoes of your grandfather when trying to do a 100-meter sprint. The contrary is true. We need to accelerate our green transition, to be at the forefront of this race. The future of the EU industry in our internal market is powered by renewables, is emission-free, is energy efficient. Clear rules for reducing, recycling and circular business models will not only protect our strategic autonomy, help mitigating the climate crisis, but also bring our companies to the forefront of this global competition. We must use subsidies strategically and focus on key green sectors like batteries, solar panels, wind turbines, heat pumps and electrolyzers. To protect the internal market, we also have to ensure European financing of net zero industries with fresh money. And one of the biggest untapped instruments is public procurement, 14% of our GDP. If we oblige procurement authorities to give preference to sustainable goods, we create a huge market for our green industries. The source of our long-term competitiveness lies in our ability to transform. Let's seize it. Thank you.
Ora facoltà di intervenire l'onorevole Bardella.
Thank you. Mr. Bardella has the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, President. There's been massive support for American businesses from President Biden, and you finally have decided to respond to this. And the Green Deal Industrial Plan seems to have woken up to reality. This is about protecting our economy, an economy that we've done so much to protect as it became globalized. But there are three major things you seem to have left out of these plans, which makes this plan somewhat weak. Firstly, a lack of a broad-ranging support plan for nuclear, when we know that this is one of the best ways to achieve energy autonomy and the best way to decarbonise our economy. Secondly, the EU electricity market. There's been a huge hike in gas prices, which is having an impact on our businesses. If you don't rethink the price-fixing mechanism, well, businesses will head off to the USA or to China, where it's cheaper to get an energy supply. Lastly, there are no protection measures for our procurement markets and no advantages given to European businesses. You want to feel that you're doing the best, but this is to the detriment of our interests. We need to go for nuclear. We need a Buy European Act. That's a major way that we can support an efficient and effective economic policy to renew our sovereignty and prosperity here on the continent. That's going to be better for our member states. It's going to be better for them in the face of the dangers of globalization. We need a geopolitical strategy in Europe. We no longer want an open market that is vulnerable to unfair competition or foreign actors who attempt to prey on us. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Bourgeois has the floor.
Thank you very much, President. Ladies and gentlemen, the answer to the IRA cannot be protectionist, can't either undermine the internal market by relaxing the state aid rules to the detriment of the workers and the companies from smaller member states. And the answer cannot either be a sovereignty fund with new debts and new taxation when what we really need is smart investment. We want to have quicker permitting for all investments, less stifling rules, structural reform, a shift in the budget towards more R&D and innovation, and the final completion of the single market. These measures, Commissioner, don't cost anything, but they will achieve the goal of achieving more competitivity and more prosperity.
Thank you. Mr. Botenga has the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, I think when we talk about industry, you need to go and see the workers. And the workers, if you talk to them, Commissioner, they'll tell you that the belly dancing that they're forced to do before multinationals is not on. This belly dancing is trying to seduce them with state aids, tax breaks, whatever you want. Because Europe, all over, wherever you go, in Belgium, France, elsewhere, there's state aids being paid out, but at the same time there are workers being sacked. So you have to break that logic, and you have to move towards a public logic where public investments are given to public companies, and certain sectors are withdrawn from the market, because there's a huge obstacle for industry when you look at the difference of energy prices between the US and the EU. So in taking back the energy sector, we'll be able to reduce costs both for companies and for consumers, and effectively provide a guarantee of public transition as the way Denmark is doing things, for example.
Thank you. Mr. Druk, you have the floor.
The European economy hasn't been so weak for 70 years. Unemployment has increased, and this is a result of the misconception about sanctions and the wrong policies of the European Commission. Increasing bureaucracy, increasing penalties and regulations do not help. They make the most modern companies relocate, and they ruin SMEs. So we only want to support future-oriented industries, which leads to massive losses of work and workplaces in traditional industries. We shouldn't stop blocking trade agreements, and Hungary and Poland should receive the funds they deserve, and thus we should provide equal opportunities in the internal market.
Vielen Dank, Frau Präsidentin, liebe Kolleginnen, liebe Kollegen, Frau Kommissarin.
Thank you very much, colleagues. The Commission believes that its new industrial plan is a response to the Investment Reduction Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, sorry. Well, I have to say this is not particularly creative strategy. It's mainly based on two ideas. There are elements of the Commission's existing working programme that has new headings, so it doesn't really change much if the content remains the same with just some new headlines. The second idea of the Commission is, again, the same old, to solve all the problems by simply throwing money at it, providing new subsidies, or finding new ways to create debt. What we really need is a less bureaucratic burden. We need lower energy costs. We need more skilled workers. That would be the right response. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Shaheen. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. There are two thoughts I would like to share today in the context of the Green Deal Industrial Plan. The first one: panic is a bad advisor. It is true that the United States presented a huge package, the IRA, which will be very good for their green industry. But some say that the IRA could be seen as a reaction to our European Green Deal or to our carbon border adjustment mechanism. We should not panic. We have many instruments in place to support our industry. Instead of panic, we should use our existing instruments effectively and targeted. And make no mistake here, industrial policy is Green Deal policy. Secondly, We cannot build competitiveness on subsidies. Giving state aid or EU subsidy to a company that is not competitive might be a quick fix, but is no long-term solution. To make sure the EU industry is resilient and competitive, it must decarbonize as soon as possible. The race to decarbonize will... Sorry.
Chiedo scusa. Ok.
Apologies.
Io
Quel succès, ça non débat.
chiediamo aiuto per poter continuare i lavori.
Can we request support so that the House can continue with the sitting?
Can you please stand with the security quickly because the ushers are...
Allora, noi vi chiediamo di poter continuare.
We respectfully request that you let us carry on with our work.
Ok, sospendiamo per qualche minuto l'aula.
We will adjourn briefly, hoping that we'll be able to carry on with our work in the proper working conditions shortly.